The ground shakes as 1,000 hooves thunder across the plain. Armored riders lean forward, their lances aimed at the enemy line. This is the image of Roman power we all know. But the true story is not about the riders. It is about the animals beneath them. What was the real story behind the horses that powered the Roman Empire? We are going to uncover the secrets of their breeding, their role in conquest, and the shocking truths modern archaeology is now revealing. You will learn how a sophisticated network of state-run ranches and advanced veterinary science created an equine engine that fueled an empire. How did they breed horses for specific tasks, from war to spectacle? And what happened when this system began to fail? When you think of Rome's might, what creature truly comes to mind? The true power of the Roman horse was not just in the glorious charge. It was in the endless, grinding work that happened far from the battlefield. Think of a legion on the move. It was not just 500 soldiers. It was a small city marching across the landscape. Every single day, that city needed tons of grain, barrels of water, and mountains of equipment. Moving all of that was an impossible task without horses. They were the living engine of the empire's supply lines, pulling the heavy wagons that kept the legions fed and armed hundreds of miles from home. This logistical network relied on speed and reliability. A messenger on a fast horse could carry vital orders from Rome to the Rhine frontier in a matter of weeks, a journey that would take a man on foot many months. This meant a governor in Britain could receive instructions from the emperor and act on them while the information was still relevant. The entire system of imperial control, the ability to administer such a vast territory, was built on the backs of these animals. Officials, tax collectors, and military commanders all traveled on horseback, their mobility allowing them to project Roman power into every corner of a province. Without this equine web, the legions would have been stranded. Their famous discipline and formations meant nothing if they were starving and isolated. The cavalry charge was the spectacular finale, but the true unsung hero was the humble pack horse, the sturdy wagon puller, and the swift courier. They were the silent partners in every Roman victory, the vital cogs in a machine that ran on hay and horsepower. So how did Rome ensure a constant supply of these essential animals? The answer lies in a sprawling, state-controlled operation that would rival any modern industry. Beyond the marching legions, a quieter revolution was taking place in the fields. The same breeding programs that produced mighty warhorses also supplied a sturdy, patient animal for the Roman farmer. Harnessed to a simple plow, a horse could turn over soil far more efficiently than an ox, allowing a single family to cultivate more land and grow more food. This agricultural surplus was the true foundation of the empire's wealth, feeding the cities and funding the armies. Without the horse in the countryside, the city of Rome itself, with its million hungry mouths, could never have existed. The clip-clop of hooves was also the soundtrack of urban life. In the narrow, crowded streets of Pompeii, every cartload of bricks for a new villa, every amphora of wine from the countryside, every sack of grain headed for the public bakeries was moved by horsepower. They were the delivery trucks and freight trains of the ancient world, their constant labor making complex urban society possible. But their roles stretched far beyond basic transport. In the quarries, horses turned massive capstans to lift heavy blocks of stone. In mills, they walked in endless circles to grind grain into flour. This was the civilian equine economy, a vast, interconnected network of animal labor that powered every aspect of daily life. Then there was the spectacle, The thunderous roar of the crowd in the Circus Maximus was not for the soldiers, but for the horses. Chariot racing was the empire's most popular sport, and the horses that competed were the superstars of their day. Bred for explosive speed and nerve, these animals were worth fortunes. Their names were recorded for posterity, their lineages celebrated. Winning a major race could bring immense wealth and prestige to their owners, who were often powerful senators or even the emperor himself. For the average Roman, these horses were symbols of speed, fortune, and divine favor. Finally, for the elite, a horse was the ultimate status symbol. A wealthy Roman did not simply own a horse. He owned a specific type of horse, a finely bred and impeccably groomed animal that signaled his taste and position. Riding through the forum on a tall, elegant Spanish stallion was a public statement of power and refinement, a moving advertisement of one's place in the social hierarchy. From the muddy field to the marble city street, from the grinding mill to the glorious racetrack, the horse was not merely a tool. It was a partner in building a civilization, a living asset that defined the rhythm and reach of the Roman world. So what kind of horse was a Roman horse? The answer is more complex than you might think. There was no single breed of Roman warhorse, no universal standard. Instead, the empire was a giant mixing pot of equine types, each carefully selected for a specific job. For the cavalrymen who needed speed and agility on the battlefield, the horse of choice often came from North Africa or the Iberian Peninsula. These were not the towering giants of later medieval lore. They were smaller, nimble, and incredibly tough, able to maneuver quickly and endure long campaigns in harsh climates. They were the sports cars of the ancient world, bred for performance over pure power. But the Roman army was not just about swift strikes. It was also a machine that moved mountains of equipment. For the heavy draft work, for pulling the massive supply wagons and artillery, Rome turned to the stockier, stronger horses from Celtic lands in Gaul and beyond. These animals were the living trucks of their day, built for strength and endurance over rough terrain. Then there was the matter of status. A high-ranking officer, a legate or a tribune, needed a mount that reflected his authority. He would often ride a larger, more impressive horse, perhaps sourced from the east, from Persian stock known for its height and noble bearing. This was less about practical warfare and more about psychology, a symbol of command meant to inspire his own troops and intimidate the enemy. The Roman approach was brilliantly pragmatic. They did not try to force one type of horse to do every job. They identified the best qualities from across their vast empire and applied them where they were needed most, creating a specialized equine workforce that was as diverse and effective as the legions themselves. This leads to a deeper question. How did the Romans manage to produce such a wide variety of horses on such an immense scale? The secret was not left to chance or individual breeders. It was a system of imperial control so advanced, it would shape the very landscape of the empire. Among the many equine stars of the empire, two breeds in particular stood out for their specialized talents. From the sun-baked hills of northern Spain came the Asturco, a horse celebrated not for raw power, but for its incredibly comfortable, smooth gait. This was the luxury vehicle of the ancient world, prized by officials, messengers, and anyone who faced long days in the saddle. While other horses had a jarring, bumpy trot, the Asturco moved with a unique, rolling motion that was easy on the rider. This smoothness translated directly into endurance. A messenger could cover vastly greater distances on an Asturco without being battered into exhaustion, making this breed a critical component of the empire's communication network. Its value was in its effortless efficiency, a living tool for sustaining the flow of information across continents. From a different part of the empire came a horse built for an entirely different purpose. The Gallic horse, from the regions we now know as France and Germany, was the cavalryman's true partner. Larger and more powerfully built than the Asturco, this was an animal of immense strength and steady nerve. Its robust frame could carry a fully armored soldier along with his shield, weapons, and supplies. But its true worth was revealed in the chaos of battle. The Gallic horse was known for its calm temperament and courage, unlikely to spook at the crash of shields or the flash of steel. This combination of power and stability made it the perfect platform for a soldier who needed to fight effectively from horseback, whether launching a javelin or holding a formation during a charge. Rome did not just use these horses. They actively sought them out, creating entire trade routes dedicated to bringing these superior animals into the heart of the empire. But how do we know all this? The evidence is not just in ancient texts. It is written in the bones left behind, and it tells a story that sometimes contradicts the written record. This systematic demand for specialized horses could not be left to chance. Rome engineered a solution as organized as its legions, the state-run stud farm. Scattered across the empire, from the grassy plains of Spain to the rolling hills of Thrace, these imperial breeding centers were the equine factories of the ancient world. Their mission was clear and monumental: to produce a standardized, reliable supply of high-quality horses for the army and administration. This was not a haphazard collection of pastures. It was a controlled, scientific operation. The Romans possessed a sophisticated, practical understanding of heredity. They knew that by carefully selecting stallions and mares with desired traits, they could predictably reproduce those qualities in the next generation. A farm in Spain might focus on breeding the smooth-gaited Asturco for messengers, while a farm in Thrace specialized in stronger, sturdier cavalry mounts. This was selective breeding on an industrial scale, a conscious effort to shape the very nature of the empire's equine workforce. At these farms, the best stallions, often captured or imported from conquered territories, were paired with the healthiest local mares. The goal was to create an animal that was not only fast or strong, but also uniform. A cavalry officer could be transferred from one end of the empire to the other and find a mount he was already familiar with, a horse of predictable size, temperament, and training. This standardization was a force multiplier, making the entire military system more efficient and resilient. The existence of these vast haras reveals a breathtaking level of long-term planning. Raising a warhorse was not a matter of months, but of years. The Roman state was investing enormous resources in a living asset that would not see service for a long time, a testament to their confidence and their bureaucratic reach. They were not just breeding horses, they were building the future, one foal at a time. A single, trained cavalry horse represented a staggering military investment. The Roman state was not just spending money on an animal, it was purchasing a complex, living piece of military equipment. We have a remarkable window into this economy thanks to the Edict of Diocletian, a law from the year 301. This was a government attempt to control rampant inflation by setting maximum prices for thousands of goods and services. Listed right there in the edict, alongside the cost for a pint of beer or a pair of shoes, is the official price for a first-grade cavalry horse. The amount was set at a breathtaking 25,000 denarii. To understand what that meant, the same document tells us a farm laborer would earn just 25 denarii for a full day's work. A common soldier's annual salary was only a fraction of the horse's price. This means a single warhorse was valued at more than a soldier's pay for an entire year. The economics are clear. The horse was worth more than the man riding it. This was not a reflection of the soldier's low worth, but a testament to the immense value and resources poured into creating that perfect warhorse. Think of the years of selective breeding at a state stud farm, the specialized training to remain calm amidst the screams of battle, the constant feeding and care. All of that capital was invested in one animal. A cavalry unit was not just a group of men, it was a mobile treasury. Losing a horse in combat was a significant financial blow to the army's logistics, a loss that went far beyond the emotional bond between a rider and his mount. This incredible cost explains why the Roman military treated its horses with such meticulous care. They were assets to be protected, maintained, and repaired. But what happened when this carefully managed system, this empire of horses, began to fracture? That immense financial investment in a cavalry horse demanded an equally intensive training process. Turning a spirited young foal into a disciplined partner for war was a long and deliberate art. The education of a Roman warhorse began with the simplest of lessons: trust. A handler would spend countless hours gentling the animal, teaching it to accept a bridle, a saddle, and most importantly, a rider. This was not about breaking its spirit, but about building a partnership. The horse learned to respond to the subtlest pressures from the rider's knees and the gentle guidance of the reins. It was a language of touch and movement, a silent dialogue between human and animal. Once this foundation of obedience was solid, the real test began. The training grounds became a theater of controlled chaos. Handlers would clash swords together, bang shields, and blast loud horns right beside the horses. The goal was desensitization, to teach these animals that the terrifying cacophony of battle was not a reason to panic and flee. A horse that shied away from a sudden noise could break a formation or throw its rider at a critical moment. They were trained to stand firm, to ignore the screams and the metal on metal, and to focus solely on the commands of the rider. This mental conditioning was as vital as any physical training. But a steady nerve was only half the requirement. The Roman cavalry was not just a mobile force, it was a tactical one. Horses were drilled in complex, synchronized maneuvers. They learned to wheel around as a single unit, to advance in a tight line, to fall back in good order, and to charge at a precise, controlled gallop. They practiced crossing difficult terrain, forging rivers, and navigating obstacles without scattering. This was not the wild, headlong charge you might imagine. It was a disciplined ballet of power and coordination, where every horse and rider acted as part of a greater whole. The success of a flanking attack or a strategic retreat depended entirely on this drilled precision. The training for a chariot horse, however, was a different world altogether. These animals were bred and conditioned for one thing only: pure, explosive speed. Hitched in teams of 2, 4, or even more, they were taught to run straight and fast, with a complete disregard for their own safety. The most famous chariot horses, the ones that raced in the Circus Maximus, were trained to respond to the charioteer's voice and the touch of the reins on their backs, as his hands were too busy controlling the vehicle to use subtle leg commands. They had to be fearless, running shoulder to shoulder with other teams at breakneck speeds, trusting the driver to guide them through the perilous turns. A single misstep could mean a catastrophic crash, injuring or killing the entire team. This specialized training created two distinct types of Roman equine athlete: the calm, intelligent battlefield partner and the blazingly fast, single-minded track superstar. Both were products of a system that understood that a horse's mind was just as important as its body. This careful cultivation of equine talent raises a profound question. How did the Romans themselves see these magnificent creatures? Were they merely living tools or something more? A Roman cavalryman did not simply ride a horse, he lived with it. This was a partnership forged in the dust and terror of the campaign trail. Official records from military forts tell us that each soldier was personally responsible for his assigned mount, a bond that began the day he joined the unit. He was the one who fed and watered the animal, who groomed its coat until it shone, and who treated its minor injuries. This daily, intimate care created a profound connection, a mutual reliance where the soldier's life literally depended on the animal's health and obedience, and the horse's well-being depended entirely on the man. They shared the same cramped quarters in frontier forts, the same long marches under a burning sun, and the same desperate moments in combat. In the chaos of a battle, a rider could not afford to be fighting his own horse. He needed to trust that it would respond instantly to a shift in his weight or a gentle pull on the reins, turning, stopping, or charging without hesitation. This was not the relationship of a driver and a vehicle. It was the synchronized understanding of two beings acting as one. When a cavalryman spoke to his horse, calming it with his voice before a charge, he was not just managing an asset. He was steadying his partner. The depth of this bond is heartbreakingly clear in the rituals of loss. We have archaeological evidence from military cemeteries where horses were given formal burials alongside their riders. In one grave, a soldier was interred with his full kit, and right beside him lay the skeleton of his horse, carefully placed as if for their final journey together. This was not a practical disposal of military property. It was a ceremony. For a soldier to lose his horse in battle was a personal and professional catastrophe. Beyond the staggering financial cost to the army, it was the loss of a companion who had shared every hardship. The mourning for such an animal was real and deeply felt, a quiet acknowledgement that the Legion had lost not just a piece of equipment, but a silent, loyal soldier. This emotional connection forces us to reconsider the entire Roman military machine. It was not a cold, unfeeling entity, but a collection of these profound, individual partnerships. How did the very structure of the empire, the system that bred and supplied these horses, ultimately come to threaten their existence? A Roman warhorse in full battle regalia was a sight designed to terrify. Its head was encased in a metal chamfron, a fierce mask that protected its eyes and face while giving the animal the appearance of a mythical beast. This was not just armor, it was psychological warfare. An enemy soldier facing a line of these masked creatures saw not horses, but monstrous extensions of the Legion's power. The chamfron was often crafted with sculpted ears and piercing eye holes, transforming the familiar shape of a horse into something alien and intimidating. Beyond the head, the horse's body was shielded by a trapper. This could be a heavy cloth or leather cape, but for the most elite cavalry, it was a coat of scale armor, thousands of small iron or bronze plates sewn onto a leather backing that swayed and clinked with the animal's movement. This scale barding was remarkably effective, deflecting sword slashes and spear thrusts that could otherwise disable the army's most valuable assets. The weight was distributed carefully so as not to overtax the horse, a testament to the Romans' practical understanding of equine limits. But function was only half the story. The Romans understood spectacle. Adorning these armored horses were the fallery, gleaming bronze or silver medallions that hung from harnesses across the chest and face. These were military decorations, the equivalent of a soldier's medals, awarded for bravery in battle. A horse covered in fallery was not just protected, it was celebrated. It was a walking testament to past victories, its very appearance telling a story of courage and experience to both its own troops and the foe. The crashing sound of the scale armor, the glint of sunlight on the polished chamfron, and the flash of the fallery created a multisensory assault. This transformed the cavalry charge from a simple military maneuver into a terrifying spectacle of noise, light, and perceived invincibility. Why go to such extravagant lengths? Because breaking the enemy's will before the first spear was thrown was a victory in itself. This intricate system of protection and pageantry represented the peak of Roman equine power, but it was a peak that could not be sustained forever. What happens when the workshops that produce this masterwork armor fall silent? That psychological advantage would have meant nothing if the rider was constantly in danger of falling off. The true secret to the Roman cavalry's effectiveness was not just in the horse's training or armor, but in a revolutionary piece of technology, the four-horned saddle. This was a masterpiece of practical engineering, a design that gave a rider a secure, locked-in seat centuries before the invention of the stirrup. Picture a simple leather seat, but one with four distinct rigid pommels or horns. Two of these horns curved up and forward over the rider's thighs, while the other two rose firmly behind the hips. When a soldier sat in this saddle, he was not merely perched on top of the horse, he was wedged securely in place. His thighs were braced against the front horns, and his lower back was supported by the rear ones. This created a framework of solid contact points that transformed his relationship with the horse. He could now use the power of his entire torso, not just his grip with his legs. This stability was the key to a new form of combat. With his body firmly anchored, a cavalryman could wield a long, two-handed lance called the contus. He could couch this heavy weapon under his arm, put the full weight of his charging horse behind it, and drive it into an enemy's shield wall without being thrown from the saddle by the impact. The shock of the collision was absorbed by the rigid horns of the saddle, not the rider's balance. He could also lean far to the side to slash down with a long sword or throw a javelin with precision, all while his horse was moving at a gallop. He became a stable fighting platform, a true extension of the horse's power. Without this saddle, such shock tactics would have been impossible. A rider would have to constantly clutch the horse's mane with one hand just to stay on, severely limiting his ability to fight. The four horns effectively gave the Roman cavalry a technological edge that other cultures lacked. It was a simple wooden and leather structure, but it functioned as the most critical piece of a cavalryman's equipment, the invention that truly fused man and horse into a single, devastating weapon. While the armored warhorse was a symbol of imperial control, the true heart of Rome beat fastest for a different kind of equine athlete. In the sprawling arena of the Circus Maximus, a different breed of horse was king, bred not for steady nerve but for explosive speed and a complete disregard for danger. The chariot horse lived for one purpose alone: to win. Its training was a study in pure, focused intensity. From the moment they were broken to harness, these animals were taught to run straight and fast at the sound of a command, their world narrowing to the track ahead and the voice of the charioteer. They were hitched in teams of 2, 4, or even more, and they had to run in perfect, terrifying synchronization. A single horse that shied or faltered could tangle the entire team and cause a catastrophic pile-up at the turn, a wreck known as a naufragia or shipwreck. These were not partners in a dialogue with their riders. They were extensions of the driver's will, living engines of velocity. The breeding for this role was equally specialized. The best chariot horses were often from North Africa, Sicily, or Spain, selected for lean, muscular builds, powerful hindquarters, and an aggressive, competitive spirit. They were the Formula One cars of the ancient world, and their value was astronomical. A successful racing horse could be worth more than a large estate, its name known and cheered by millions. Victories were recorded on intricate mosaics, and the most famous horses, like the bay stallion Pollux or the fiery Abagius, became household names, their lineages celebrated as thoroughly as those of emperors. The horses did not race for themselves, but for one of four powerful factions: the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. These were not mere sports teams, they were vast, corporation-like organizations that owned the horses, the stables, the chariots, and employed the drivers. Support for a faction, particularly the dominant blues and greens, could border on religious fervor, cutting across all social classes. The emperor himself was often a passionate partisan. When your horse and chariot thundered to victory, it was not just a personal triumph. It was a vindication of your entire faction and its millions of supporters. The cultural impact was immense. The success of a horse was seen as a sign of divine favor, a direct message from the gods. A winning streak could influence public mood and even political stability. For a few breathtaking minutes, the fate of a race, and by extension the pride of a city, rested entirely on the strength of four equine hearts and the skill of the man holding the reins. This was a world of glory, gold, and gruesome risk, a spectacle that perfectly mirrored the brutal, dazzling nature of Rome itself. The roar of the Circus Maximus was deafening, but the most important race in the empire happened in silence, along lonely roads stretching for thousands of miles. This was the cursus publicus, the Roman internet, a state-run courier system that bound the sprawling empire together with the speed of a galloping horse. Imagine a vital dispatch from a governor in rebellious Britain. It could not rely on a single rider and a single horse, a journey that would take months and exhaust both. Instead, the system was a relay of breathtaking efficiency. A messenger would arrive at a way station, a mutatio, where a fresh horse was already saddled and waiting. In a matter of moments, he would transfer his sealed leather pouch to a new rider, who would immediately launch himself down the road toward the next station. This endless chain of fresh men and fresh mounts could move information at a staggering pace of 50 miles a day. A message could travel from the northern frontier of England to the city of Rome in just over 3 weeks, a feat that was nothing short of miraculous in the ancient world. The mutations were the beating hearts of this network. Placed every 10 to 15 miles along all major roads, these were not sleepy inns but efficient logistical hubs. They housed grooms, veterinarians, and a constant supply of the system's lifeblood, the hardy, durable horses bred specifically for this relentless work. These animals were the unsung heroes of imperial control, the ones who made real the famous boast that all roads lead to Rome. An emperor in his palace could receive reports, issue commands, and collect taxes from provinces he would never see, all because this equine web pulsed with information. The entire administration of the empire, its laws, its taxes, and its military deployments depended on the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves changing at each station. This system was the central nervous system of a living organism, and the horses were the neurons firing signals across a continent. But what happened when this vital network, so dependent on imperial order and funding, began to fray at the edges? A horse's broken leg was not always a death sentence in the Roman world. Behind the spectacle of the circus and the discipline of the legions stood a figure as crucial as any breeder or trainer, the army veterinarian. These were not mere stable hands, but highly trained professionals who practiced a level of equine medicine that would not be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. Their knowledge was systematically compiled in detailed manuals, the most famous being Mulum Decina by Publius Flavius Vegetius. This text was not a collection of folk remedies, but a practical, comprehensive guide for maintaining the health of the empire's most vital assets. It detailed everything from routine hoof care to complex surgical procedures, revealing a sophisticated understanding of equine anatomy and physiology. A Roman horse doctor knew how to diagnose and treat colic, a common and often fatal digestive ailment, using a combination of carefully selected herbs, controlled exercise, and even enemas to relieve the blockage. He could set a broken bone with wooden splints and bandages, giving the animal a fighting chance at recovery. He understood the importance of cleaning and stitching battle wounds to prevent infection, using wine or vinegar as antiseptics. Perhaps most surprisingly, Roman veterinarians practiced early forms of dental care. They recognized that sharp points on a horse's teeth could cause pain and difficulty eating, leading to weight loss and poor performance. Using specialized files, they would rasp these points down, a procedure known as floating that is still standard practice today. This was medicine based on observation and experience, a systematic effort to preserve the state's enormous investment in its living machinery. But how did this knowledge, so advanced for its time, ultimately fare as the world the Romans built began to change around them? The intricate web of imperial stud farms and veterinary knowledge was a masterpiece of logistics, but it was also terrifyingly fragile. This entire system, from the breeding of a single foal to the armor on its back, depended on two things: the immense wealth of the Roman state and the unbroken peace within its borders. When those foundations began to crack, the empire of horses began to crumble. We can trace this decline through the empire's greatest military catastrophes, moments when the legendary Roman cavalry was simply not what it used to be. Facing the Parthians in the east, Roman legions often found themselves outmaneuvered by armies comprised almost entirely of horse archers. These were not head-on clashes, but wars of constant harassment. The Parthians would ride circles around the slower Roman formations, showering them with arrows from a distance, and then vanish into the dust before a countercharge could be organized. To defeat this, Rome needed vast numbers of light, fast, and incredibly agile cavalry of its own. The very specialty mounts its state-run farms were struggling to produce in sufficient numbers. The system, optimized for sturdy Gallic horses and reliable pack animals, could not pivot quickly enough to meet this new, swarming threat. The problem was not just tactics, it was supply. As political instability and inflation racked the empire in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the funding for the great imperial stud farms dried up. Maintaining the bloodlines of superior horses requires generations of consistent investment, a long-term vision that becomes impossible during a civil war or an economic collapse. Without state subsidies and careful oversight, the breeding programs faltered. The best stallions were not replaced, the pastures were sold off or abandoned, and the priceless, accumulated knowledge of generations of breeders was simply lost. The result was a steady, irreversible decline in the average quality of the Roman warhorse. The army was forced to rely more and more on hiring foreign mercenary cavalry, from Germanic tribes or later, the Huns themselves. This was a stark admission of failure. The empire that had once engineered its own perfect equine workforce could no longer supply its most basic military needs. This was not a single event, but a slow bleed. A legion on the frontier might receive a shipment of new mounts that were smaller, less hardy, and less well-trained than those of their father's generation. Each new cohort of horses was, on average, just a little bit worse than the last. This decay was invisible year by year, but over a century its effect was catastrophic. The Roman cavalry, once a precise and terrifying instrument, became a shadow of its former self, just as it faced its greatest challenge. When the Huns arrived on the frontiers, they were not just another tribe of horse archers. They represented the absolute peak of Eurasian equestrian culture, riding horses bred for centuries to endure the harsh steppes, and possessing a symbiotic relationship with their mounts that the Romans had never needed to match. The Roman horse, the product of a complex, centralized system, was simply outclassed by the horse of the nomadic rider. The empire's military struggles were about far more than just horses, but the decline of its equine core was a critical weakness. It was the failure of a grand experiment in biological engineering, a silent crisis that unfolded in pastures and stables long before it was decided on the battlefield. The written records tell one story, but the bones never lie. When archaeologists carefully brush the dirt from a horse skeleton buried at a Roman fort, they are uncovering a silent witness that can speak volumes. The most immediate and shocking revelation is the animal's size. The popular image of a massive medieval warhorse is completely wrong for the Roman period. The average cavalry mount stood only about 14 hands high, which is the shoulder height of a large pony by modern standards. These were not giants, but they were incredibly robust. Analysis of leg bones reveals thick, dense walls, clear evidence of animals bred for strength and endurance, capable of carrying a heavy load for mile after grueling mile. You can see the stress of their lives etched right into their skeletons. Vertebrae often show signs of arthritis, a testament to years of hard campaigning under the weight of a rider and his gear. Their teeth are worn down, sometimes to the roots, not just from age, but from the constant grinding on gritty feed, often contaminated with sand and dust from the hard stone querns used to grind their grain. These are not the bones of pampered pets, but of hard-working partners in a demanding world. The causes of death recorded in these remains are particularly telling. We find skeletons with horrific battle injuries, legs sheared off by bladed weapons, and ribs shattered by the impact of a heavy spear. But we also find more subtle tragedies. Some horses show signs of a broken leg that had begun to heal, a quiet testament to the care of an army veterinarian and a soldier who refused to give up on his mount. Others tell a darker story. Mass graves filled with young, healthy horses that were all killed at the same time reveal a brutal military logic. When a fortress was abandoned or a legion was forced into a rapid retreat, the horses could not be taken. To prevent them from falling into enemy hands, the entire herd was slaughtered, a devastating but necessary act of war that speaks to their immense strategic value. This forensic evidence forces us to look past the glory of the charge and see the gritty, often brutal reality of a horse's life in the service of Rome. The Huns did not just bring terror, they brought a new kind of horse. These were not the sturdy, reliable mounts the Romans had engineered in their stud farms. Descended from the vast, wind-swept steppes of Central Asia, the Hunnic horse was a different creature entirely. It was smaller, often shaggier, and built with a lean, wiry frame that seemed to be made of pure endurance. It could survive on scant forage, travel immense distances with little water, and endure temperature extremes that would kill a pampered Roman cavalry horse. More importantly, it was incredibly agile, able to pivot and change direction with a thought, making it the perfect partner for the Hunnic warrior's signature tactic, the feigned retreat. A Roman cavalryman, trained for disciplined charges and close order combat, found himself chasing ghosts. The Hunnic riders would swarm, loose a cloud of arrows from their powerful composite bows, and then suddenly scatter, seeming to flee in panic. The instinct was to give chase, to run them down, but it was a trap. As the Roman formation broke apart in pursuit, the Huns would wheel their nimble horses around on a dime and fire backwards over their shoulders, cutting down their disorganized pursuers. This was the infamous Parthian shot, perfected to a devastating degree. The Roman system, for all its sophistication, had produced a horse and a rider for a very specific kind of war, a war of set-piece battles and shield walls. It was utterly unprepared for this swirling, chaotic style of combat, a deadly dance where the steppe pony was the lead partner. The Roman military, pragmatic to its core, was forced to adapt or die. The late empire saw a desperate and fundamental shift in its approach to cavalry. The old dream of a standardized, state-bred warhorse was quietly abandoned. Instead, Rome began to hire the very horsemen it feared, enrolling entire tribes of Huns, Alans, and Sarmatians as allied troops, or foederati. These warriors brought their own horses, their own saddles, and their own lethal skills. A Roman general on the frontier now had a new, volatile tool in his arsenal, a unit of steppe cavalry that could fight fire with fire. This was a revolutionary and humbling admission. The empire that had once bred its own perfect equine soldiers now had to outsource its cavalry to the barbarians. But the influence went beyond mere hiring. The Roman army itself began to change its equipment and training to mimic its new enemies. The heavy, scale-armored barding that had once defined the Roman cataphract became less common, replaced by lighter protection that allowed for greater speed and maneuverability. Roman cavalry started to train more extensively in archery from horseback, attempting to master the skills that had so confounded them. They even began to import and breed more of the Eastern horse types, hoping to infuse their own herds with that legendary toughness and agility. This was not a smooth, planned transition. It was a chaotic, often reluctant revolution born of desperation. The Roman horse, a product of centuries of careful control, was suddenly being reshaped by the wild ponies of the steppe. The very identity of the Roman cavalry, once a symbol of imperial order, was becoming barbarized. What did this mean for the soul of the legions, when the heartbeat of their mobility now came from the heart of the wilderness? The story of Incitatus is so bizarre it feels like a myth, but it reveals a profound truth about the Roman relationship with horses. The Emperor Caligula did not merely own a favorite horse. He elevated it to a position of supreme political power, at least in name. Ancient historians like Suetonius tell us this animal lived in a marble stable with an ivory manger, wore a collar of precious gems, and was fed oats mixed with gold flakes. The most shocking claim is that Caligula planned to make the horse a consul, one of the two highest elected offices in the Roman Republic. While most scholars agree the official appointment never actually happened, the story itself is a powerful piece of political satire. It was a brutal, public mockery of the senatorial class. Caligula was saying, in the most insulting way possible, that his horse was more worthy of high office than the corrupt and scheming aristocrats of Rome. Incitatus was not just a pet, he was a weapon, a living insult aimed at the heart of the establishment. But to understand this fully, we must look beyond the palace. The practice of naming and celebrating individual horses was not confined to mad emperors. In the world of chariot racing, horses were the true celebrities. Their names were shouted by millions. We know of a horse called Victor who won 429 races, a staggering career. Another, named Porcellus, meaning little pig, was beloved for his unlikely speed and spirit. These names were not chosen at random. They reflected the animal's personality, its appearance, or the hopes of its owner. A fast horse might be called Fulminatus, meaning lightning, while a powerful, dark animal could be named Niger, the Black. These were not anonymous livestock. They were individuals whose achievements were recorded for posterity in stone and mosaic. What does this tell us? It shows a society that recognized the unique spirit within each animal. A Roman could look at a horse and see more than a tool. They could see a partner worthy of a name, an athlete worthy of fame, and in the case of Incitatus, a political statement powerful enough to humiliate the entire Senate. This deep, complex connection forces a final, haunting question. As the world they knew began to end, what became of the horses that helped build it? Riding through a silent gallery of stone and tile, we find the most enduring portraits of the Roman horse. They are frozen in mosaics, captured in bronze, and painted on frescoed walls, not as mythical beasts but as the living, breathing partners of daily life. These artworks are far more than decoration. They are a detailed visual archive, a fossilized record of the equine world that texts alone can never provide. Look closely at a mosaic from a wealthy villa's floor. A chariot team strains at the starting gates of the Circus Maximus. The artist has taken care to show the exact configuration of the harness, the way the reins are threaded through the rings, and the tense, muscular bodies of the North African breeds favored for racing. Every detail, from the type of bit in the horse's mouth to the posture of the driver, was rendered from direct observation. This was a scene every Roman would recognize instantly, and its accuracy was paramount. It was a snapshot of their world, a testament to the animals they celebrated. In the bronze statue of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius astride his mount, we see a different kind of truth. The horse is powerful, its neck arched, its ears pricked forward. But notice its legs, one raised as if in motion. This is not the static pose of an earlier Greek sculpture. It is a moment of controlled power, a glimpse into the ideal of the imperial warhorse, calm yet brimming with energy. The saddle is depicted with care, the four horns subtly suggested, anchoring the emperor securely for his symbolic ride. Even the tombstone of a simple cavalryman tells a story. A crude but earnest carving shows the soldier holding the reins of his sturdy mount. The horse's head is turned affectionately towards him, a poignant, personal tribute to the bond they shared, immortalized in stone for eternity. These images collectively answer questions that scrolls cannot. They show us the sheer variety of coat colors, from dappled grays to rich bays. They confirm the small, robust size of the average horse. They illustrate the different riding postures, the way a messenger might lean forward for speed versus the upright, commanding seat of an officer. When the empire's written records faded, its art continued to speak, offering a silent, steadfast testimony to the creatures that moved an empire. What secrets, then, do we uncover when we listen to the echoes of their final hoofbeats, as the stables of the world grew dark? A rider charging into battle without stirrups seems to defy physics. A man perched precariously on a living, leaping platform. Yet for centuries, the Roman cavalry did exactly that, and conquered the known world in the process. The common belief that stirrups were a necessary invention for effective shock combat is one of history's most persistent myths. The Romans not only managed without them, they mastered cavalry warfare through a combination of superior technology, relentless training, and brilliant tactics that made the stirrup irrelevant. Their secret weapon was the four-horn saddle, that rigid wooden frame we discussed earlier. This saddle did not just provide comfort, it created a solid, integrated fighting unit. A rider braced within its four horns was locked in place by the pressure against his thighs and hips. This grip was so secure he could stand up in the saddle to throw a javelin, lean far to the side to slash with a long sword, or absorb the massive shock of driving a heavy lance into an enemy shield wall. The saddle transformed his body into a stable extension of the horse's power. Training was the second pillar of this system. Roman cavalry drills were not about riding in a straight line. They were about building a symbiotic relationship between man and animal. Horses were conditioned to respond to the slightest shift in a rider's weight, a nudge from a knee, or the gentle pressure of a rein against the neck. This allowed for complex battlefield maneuvers without the rider ever needing to yank on the reins or use his hands for balance. His hands were free to fight because his seat was secured by the saddle's design and his own drilled instincts. Tactics formed the final piece of the puzzle. Roman cavalry did not rely on the single, decisive charge of medieval knights. Their strength was in flexibility and coordination. They acted as mobile skirmishers, screening the flanks of the legions, pursuing broken enemies, and launching controlled, disciplined charges at precise moments to disrupt enemy formations. They fought as a cohesive team, not as a collection of individual knights. The charge itself was a tactical hammer blow, not a chaotic melee. The rider's goal was not to remain seated through sheer leg strength, but to use his stable platform to deliver a powerful, accurate attack, and then wheel away for another pass. The stirrup, when it finally arrived in Europe centuries later, certainly made riding easier and more accessible. It lowered the barrier to entry for cavalry, allowing less trained riders to stay mounted more easily. But for the highly disciplined, professionally trained Roman horseman, it was a solution to a problem he had already solved. His dominance was not born from a missing piece of equipment, but from a complete system of engineering, education, and strategy that made his partnership with the horse a terrifyingly effective weapon. This mastery raises a deeper, more unsettling question about the nature of their success. What other hidden strengths held their world together, and what fragile threads, when pulled, could make the entire tapestry unravel? The true cost of a Roman cavalry charge was measured not in gold, but in grass. Every single one of those specialized war horses consumed between 15 and 20 pounds of fodder each day. Multiply that by the thousands of horses attached to a single legion on the march, and the scale of the problem becomes almost unimaginable. An army was a mobile, ravenous consumer of the countryside, and its appetite for forage could dictate the very path of a campaign. A Roman general's first thought was not always about the enemy's position, but about the location of the nearest fields or grasslands where his horses could eat. The primary fuel for this equine engine was barley. This grain provided the concentrated energy needed for demanding work, from a long march to a sudden charge. But barley alone was not enough. The diet was supplemented with hay, vast quantities of it, dried and bundled for transport to provide roughage and maintain digestive health. In colder months, or for horses needing extra strength, they might receive broad beans or even crushed vetches, a protein-rich boost to their condition. This was not a casual grazing operation. It was a precise, calculated science of equine nutrition. understood by army veterinarians and logicians alike. Securing this endless river of fodder was a logistical nightmare that shaped Roman strategy. A legion could not simply wander into enemy territory hoping to find enough pasture. If it did, it would be tethered to the slow pace of its grazing animals, vulnerable to attack and unable to pursue its objectives. The solution was a supply chain as disciplined as the army itself. Supply officers, called quaestionarii, were dispatched weeks or even months ahead of the army's route. Their job was to identify sources of grain and hay, negotiate with local farmers, and arrange for its transport to predetermined collection points along the planned line of march. This created a moving larder that kept the army fed and mobile. On major, established campaigns, supply ships would shadow the army's progress along coastlines or navigable rivers, their holds packed with grain and hay, acting as floating warehouses that could be unloaded at a moment's notice. The entire system was a breathtaking feat of foresight and organization, a hidden war fought not with swords, but with schedules and ledgers. Yet this intricate system had a critical weakness. It was utterly dependent on a friendly or conquered landscape. When an army moved beyond the empire's borders or into a region stripped bare by war, the entire machine could grind to a halt. A lack of forage was a strategic weapon. An enemy could practice a scorched earth policy, burning their own fields and driving off their livestock to deny the Romans the resources they needed to survive. There are numerous accounts in the historical record of entire legions and their cavalry auxiliaries being forced to turn back, not by enemy soldiers, but by empty fields. The horses would grow weak, then emaciated. A starving horse loses its strength long before it dies, becoming unable to carry a rider or pull a supply wagon. At that point, the cavalry was dismounted, the supply trains stalled, and the army became a stranded, vulnerable mass of men. The mighty Roman war machine, for all its armor and discipline, was held together by the humble stalk of barley. This fundamental vulnerability forces us to see the Roman conquests in a new light. Every victory was as much a triumph of the quartermaster as it was of the legionary. And when the empire's vast internal supply networks began to fail, this hidden weakness would be exposed on a catastrophic scale. That deep personal bond between a soldier and his mount hints at a spiritual dimension that ran through all of Roman society. For the Romans, the horse was not merely a physical asset. It was a creature touched by the divine, a living bridge to the gods. This sacred connection was embodied by Epona, a goddess they adopted wholeheartedly from the Celtic peoples they conquered. Unlike the distant, powerful gods of Olympus, Epona was a deity of the stable and the hearth. Her image was carved into the wooden walls of barracks and painted in the niches of civilian homes, a protector of all equines and those who cared for them. She was often depicted seated sideways on a gentle mare, holding a basket of fruit or grain, a symbol of abundance and benevolent guardianship. To pray to Epona was to ask for the health of your plow horse, the safety of your chariot team, or the safe return of your cavalry mount. Her widespread worship reveals a profound truth. The Romans acknowledged that their fortune, from their daily bread to their military victories, depended on the well-being of these animals, and they sought divine favor to ensure it. But the relationship with the sacred was not always so gentle. One of the oldest and most brutal Roman rituals was the sacrifice of the October horse. Each year, at the end of the military campaigning season, the right-hand horse of the winning team in a bloody chariot race was singled out. This animal was then ritually slain with a spear. Its tail was swiftly cut off and carried, still dripping, to the Regia, the ancient heart of the state, where its blood was carefully preserved for use in purifying rites. The head of the horse, meanwhile, became an object of a fierce struggle between the residents of two Roman neighborhoods. This gruesome ceremony was far more than a simple offering. It was a symbolic act of immense power. The horse represented the vitality and martial success of the Roman people. By killing it and distributing its potent parts, the Romans believed they were channeling that strength, that victorious spirit, back into the soil of the city and its people, ensuring fertility for the coming year and continued success in battle. The horse was a vessel for the very life force of the state. The desire to understand the will of the gods through horses, a practice known as hippomancy, was another facet of this spiritual link. Before a general committed his army to a major battle, he might seek an omen in the behavior of the sacred white horses kept in the temple of Mars, the god of war. If these horses were seen to eat their feed eagerly and without hesitation, it was a powerful sign of divine favor, a promise of victory that could bolster the confidence of an entire legion. The most famous legend of hippomancy involved the founding of the city itself. When Romulus and Remus stood on their hills, waiting for a sign from the gods to see who would rule, 6 vultures appeared to Remus. But then 12 vultures flew before Romulus. The ultimate decision, according to some accounts, came from watching the horses. The horses of Romulus were seen to be more vigorous and spirited, a clear sign that the gods had chosen him. The very existence of Rome, therefore, was linked to an omen read in the energy of horses. From the humble stable to the grand temple, from the personal prayer to the state-sanctioned sacrifice, the horse was woven into the spiritual fabric of Roman life. They were partners not just in labor and war, but in a cosmic dialogue between the human and the divine. Their genetic legacy is a ghost story written in living flesh. Do the carefully bred lines of Roman war horses simply vanish, or do their descendants still walk among us? This question drives a fierce debate between equine historians and modern geneticists, a search for hoofprints leading from antiquity to the present. For centuries, the connection seemed obvious. Look at the powerful, arched neck of the Spanish Andalusian, a breed known for its intelligence and agility. It perfectly matches the description of the prized Iberian horses the Romans so coveted for their cavalry. The sturdy black Frisian, with its feathered legs and calm demeanor, bears a striking resemblance to the heavier horses the Romans imported from northern Europe for draft work. The logic of lineage felt undeniable. These modern breeds, developed in regions once solidly under Roman control, must be the direct heirs of the imperial equine project. The thread seemed to weave unbroken from the stables of Caesar to the riding schools of today. But genetics has a way of complicating our most cherished stories. When scientists began analyzing the DNA of modern European horse breeds, they were looking for a distinct genetic signature, a marker that could be traced back to a single, organized Roman breeding program. That clear signal has proven frustratingly elusive. The genetic map of the horse is a palimpsest, a document written over countless times by millennia of migration, trade, and conquest. The Roman period is just one layer in a much deeper story. The challenge is immense. Roman horses were not a single, closed breed, but a constantly mixing population drawn from across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Their state stud farms were centers of amalgamation, not purification, blending Spanish Asturcans with Gallic war horses and Eastern stallions. This very diversity, the empire's great strength, now obscures its direct genetic footprint. You cannot find the Roman horse because, in a sense, it was never a single thing to begin with. Yet, the absence of a single genetic marker does not mean their influence is a myth. The true Roman legacy may not be in a specific bloodline, but in the very idea of selective breeding itself. The Romans did not just take the horses they found, they systematically improved them. They established the concept of breeding for a purpose, for a specific set of physical and mental traits. This knowledge, this systematic approach to equine husbandry, did not disappear with the empire. It was preserved in the monasteries and great estates of the early Middle Ages, becoming the foundation upon which all modern European breeds were later built. So when you admire the graceful power of an Andalusian, you may not be looking at a purebred Roman horse, but you are almost certainly looking at the product of a system they perfected. The debate continues, with each new archaeological DNA sample offering a potential clue. The ghost in the bloodline remains elusive, but the shadow it casts is long and undeniable. The theories of historians meet the hard reality of the saddle in the fields where modern reenactors ride. These dedicated enthusiasts, clad in meticulously reproduced armor and riding horses trained with ancient techniques, are the new pioneers of experimental archaeology. Their work is not a hobby, it is a living laboratory, testing the written word against the physical truth of muscle, leather, and terrain. What they have discovered often overturns centuries of academic assumption. The most profound revelation came from the four-horn saddle. For years, scholars debated how effective this strange-looking design could possibly be without stirrups. The reenactors provided a definitive answer. When a rider settles into the rigid wooden frame, the transformation is immediate. The front horns brace against the thighs, the rear horns lock against the hips, creating a secure seat that feels like being part of the horse itself. At a full gallop, riders find they can stand in the saddle, lean far to the side to throw a javelin, or even couch a long lance without being thrown by the impact. The saddle does not just work, it creates a level of stability that many find superior to a simple flat pad with stirrups. It proves the Roman cavalryman was not a precarious passenger, but a fully integrated, stable fighting platform. The armor, too, has yielded surprising truths. A full set of scale barding for a horse looks incredibly heavy on paper, but when a reenactor fits it onto an animal, they find its weight is cleverly distributed across the back and shoulders. The horse adapts to it quickly, and the psychological effect is undeniable. The sight of an approaching line of these masked, armored creatures is deeply unsettling, even when you know it is just a demonstration. The clattering of the scales and the glint of the metal chamfrons create a wall of sound and light that feels less like a charge and more like an impending natural disaster. This practical experience confirms that Roman horse armor was as much about theater and terror as it was about pure protection. Perhaps the most humbling lessons have come from training. Modern riders, even experienced ones, have struggled to master the subtle, weight-based commands the Romans relied on. It takes months of patient work to teach a horse to turn from knee pressure alone, or to stop from a shift in the rider's seat. This slow, difficult process has given historians a new appreciation for the sheer amount of time and resources the Roman army must have invested in drilling both its men and its horses. It was not a skill learned quickly, but a deep, nonverbal language that forged a single entity from man and animal. The reenactors have not proven that the ancient manuals were wrong, but they have revealed the immense, unspoken effort that lay between the lines of text. This living history forces us to confront the Roman equestrian world not as a collection of artifacts, but as a physical, breathless, and demanding reality. The story of Rome is, in its bones, a story told by horses. From the swift messenger on the imperial road to the thundering chariot in the circus, we have uncovered a world where human ambition was built upon equine power. The Roman horse was not a single creature, but a living, breathing technology, meticulously engineered for 1,000 different tasks. It was the sturdy wagon puller that fueled the supply lines, the calm battlefield partner drilled for combat, and the high-strung athlete bred for spectacle. This empire of horses was sustained by a sophisticated system of state-run breeding, advanced veterinary medicine, and revolutionary equipment like the four-horn saddle. Their value was measured in fortunes, their care a matter of military science, and their loss a personal and strategic tragedy. Rome did not simply use horses, it forged a partnership with them, a relationship that was at once practical, emotional, and sacred. The next time you picture the legions, listen for the sound beneath the marching feet. The true rhythm of the empire was not the stomp of a soldier's boot, but the steady, relentless beat of 1,000 hooves. What part of this hidden history surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.